All right. All right. So we're going to move on to the ecology. We've done some of the abiotic factors. We're going to move into some of the biotic factors. And this is the part that I absolutely really adore. I tend to think about pollinators as being active in the summer. We think about long summer days and listening to bees buzzing, looking at beautiful butterflies, maybe a hummingbird coming to visit a flower. But actually, a lot of this stuff also happens in the cool temperatures, not to such a degree, but these things are all beginning to happen in the spring. And I wanted to introduce you to some of the pollinators, not only the ones we know about, but some of the ones we don't think about. So as you can see, I was tickled when I found these little graphics. So we're going to look at bees. We're going to look at flies, beetles, caterpillars and butterflies, and a little bit about hummingbirds. So the first part is going to be about pollinators. So when we think of bees, we often think about this guy. This is a honeybee that I took a picture of in the garden last year, and we have a hive of honeybees. And yet these bees do not belong here. This is a European honeybee. It was imported when Europeans first came to the United States, or to the Americas at that time. And these are bees we see a lot of publicity about. But in fact, we have over 4,000 native bees, and they are wonderful. This is just a smattering of our native bees. This is our carpenter bee. It's the largest bee there is. This is Perdita species. We don't have these. These are in California, but we do have tiny sweat bees and some other kinds of bees. So you can see just even from this one graphic that there's a huge diversity in bees, and different bees do different things. And it's absolutely fascinating. And my next talk, hopefully without any technical problems, will be on bees. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at the bees that visit spring wildflowers. And spring wildflowers are critically important for many of these bees. This is bloodroot. And just even from these pictures that are from this website, Native Biology, you can see the diversity of bees. Each one of these is a different group of bees, a different species. And they're coming to this flower. This flower doesn't put out nectar. This flower puts out pollen. Nectar is taken by the bees to eat, to sustain themselves. These are not social bees. These are actually solitary bees. They're not going into a hive and sharing that nectar to make honey, but they are using the honey for themselves. What they're mostly interested in this time of year is the pollen. And this flower, bloodroot, doesn't put out nectar. It just puts out pollen. They're gathering the pollen and they are taking it to their nests in the ground, typically, sometimes in stems, laying an egg, putting the pollen in with them, and then sealing it off. So these bees are gathering that pollen to start the next generation of bees. And this is really cute. This is a carpenter bee. We're so used to our big, bulky bees, but this is a carpenter bee too. It's one of the little cousins. All right, so let's take a closer look at some of the bee species that are out in the spring. Bumblebee queens are some of the earliest flyers because they can fly at 41 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty chilly for a bee. They can do this because of a number of things. One is that they have a nice fuzzy coat that again traps air. They can vibrate, and so they can warm themselves up. And they also are a relatively dark color, so they can reflect some of that, absorb some of that heat from the sun. There's another thing that jumped into my mind and jumped right back out. But basically, these are queen bees. The whole of their colony at the end of last year died. And so she is responsible for establishing the new colony. So she's out early looking for nectar and pollen, and she's more successful because she's a generalist. She is not focusing on any particularly specific flower. She will take anything. So if you're interested in bumblebees in specific, there's a couple of websites on here that give you free resources about bumblebees. Extremely interesting and very beautiful. So the queens are out and about when it's really quite cold. This is a video about buzz pollination. These bees vibrate, and they particularly vibrate in plants that look like this. I am not going to show you this video because I've had enough with technology today, but I will send it to you so you can look at it. So some bees, specifically spring beauty bees, let's move this away so you can see it, specifically Andrena species. This is a whole group of bees. They are oligolectic, which means that they like specific plants, specific groups of flowers. And this is a spring beauty bee. It's on spring beauty or Claytonia. And I love this picture because it shows pink pollen, which I think is just wonderful. A lot of these spring bees are oligolectic. There's a trout lily bee. And actually this whole way of interacting with flowers is quite common. And there's a list of plants that bees that are specialists at this website right here. Whereas this bee is specific to this plant is not specific to this bee. And spring beauty or Claytonia, research has shown it's one of the it's visited by the most diversity of pollinators. And so you have visiting lots of small dark bees, cuckoo bees. They visit, they don't need to gather the pollen. I guess they just eat the pollen, but they visit. Bee flies visit, and then some other types of bees and some butterflies. So lots and lots of visitors to Claytonia. So if you can plant anything in a woodland garden, plant spring beauty for pollinators. It's a good choice. Bee flies. I think this is the cutest little image. This is a photograph taken from an entomology grad student, which they shared with me. And these are so cute that I was actually on a Facebook page for our honeybees. And instead of pictures of honeybees, they posted this picture. And when they were told about it, they said they did it deliberately because it was so cute. It's kind of a mixed message because actually a bee fly and bees do not get on in the ecological world. Because bee flies, and this is a lovely picture of a bee fly in action, is actually laying its egg into the nest. It's able to propel its egg above ground into the tube that's underground of a ground-dwelling bee. And once that egg hatches, it's going to eat the bee larva. So not the best relationship, but flies are a more frequent visitor to flowers than bees are. So they actually have really good value as a pollinator. And look at that fuzziness. That's going to enable him or her in this case, to carry a lot of pollen from one flower to another. We don't often realize insects are as hairy as they are. Some of the things we don't think of as hairy are really quite hairy. This looks like an ordinary housefly to me, and it's here on a trillium. And it looks like it's actually licking the stigma of this flower. But I just wanted to put it in just to show you that some of the unattractive flies that we think of are visiting spring wildflowers. Another tiny, tiny pollinator is a fungus gnat, and it comes to things that smell really bad. And in this case, stinking Benjamin, this red trillium, and then Jack in the pulpit. These are both have bad smells, and so they're pollinated by things that like to hang out on meat. And again, this is from an entomology student. And I included it because I wanted you to see a fungus gnat. They're probably smaller than your little fingernail. But again, if you look really close up at this image, look at all those hairs. Look at all those hairs on there. Look at the hairs on the antenna. These things are covered in hairs, and they're going to be able to pick up a tiny piece of pollen and move it from one plant to another. Like I said, the bloodroot doesn't have any nectar, but other plants are just dripping with nectar. And that means that it can be a great source of nutrition for butterflies and moths. Spring beauty, phlox, columbine, and Virginia bluebells all have lots and lots of nectar. We often think about butterflies as being our pollinators, and we don't really talk about moths. But actually, moths exist in the world 15 times more than butterflies. Butterflies evolved from moths. Moths are the species that were here. And again, you can see the furriness. They're going to pick up a lot of pollen. So we underestimate moths as a pollinator in general. Here's the beetle I was telling you about, or thinking about, that even though we don't think of beetles as being hairy or pollinators, look at all that pollen on this red-necked false blister beetle. If you Google red-necked false blister beetle and trout lily, you will see just plants covered in these beetles. This is a group of beetles that actually eats pollen. And so they're there to eat the pollen, but in that process of them chomping down, they're moving the pollen from flower to flower. This is a bloodroot. They're on trout lily, but they're also on hepatica and probably others that I don't know about. So this, even though we don't think of beetles as a pollinator, they were really one of the first pollinators because they evolved before bees did. And so some of our very early evolved plants, like magnolia, for example, our southern magnolia is pollinated by beetles because beetles and the magnolia evolved before bees. So another kind of really cool thing to do with ecology of plants and insects. So butterflies and moths need a host plant for their caterpillars to eat. And here are some I've listed: violets, cutleaf, toothwort, and columbine, and they're host plants for butterflies and moths. What I was particularly struck by when I started researching violets at the beginning of lockdown was that I suddenly realized that we had violets in our butterfly garden and hadn't really paid attention because I'd never really seen a caterpillar on them. I see caterpillars on the milkweed, the spice bushes, the pipe vine. I'd see caterpillars on there, but nothing on the violets, and I had never really thought about it. But actually, the fritillaries live in the leaf litter, and then they visit the violets after dark. So you won't see them, but they are there. And as you can see, they feed a lot of species of butterfly, of fritillary. So violets, even though people sometimes curse them because they do spread so well, they're really a wonderful plant to have in your environment. And they're pretty. What can you say? Now, ecology, we're going to move to seed dispersal. Let me move my notes just a little bit, so just in case. All right, here we go. Ants. If you're interested in ants at all, and I know that's kind of an odd thing to be interested in, If you want to see some phenomenal, fantastic pictures, look up Alex Wild. He takes these amazing pictures and videos of ants. This is the seed of a bloodroot, and you can see the ants are very interested in it. These are winnow ants, probably. They are responsible for taking about 2/3 of the seeds from the forest floor. Now, what they're doing is taking the seeds back to their nests so they can feed that elaiosome, which is this right here, to their baby larva, to the baby ants, because it's high in protein and lipids and so forth. And then what they do is they toss the seed out into their refuse pile. Their refuse pile is full of all the organic materials they don't want. It's aerated by the ants, and so it's fertile. They've moved then the seed away from the parent plant and planted it somewhere else. And so it gets a better chance of germinating. Now, one study shows that if you remove these kinds of ants from the woodland environment, herbaceous abundance and plant diversity can decrease by 50%. So these little guys are critical for the survival of these wildflowers. This is a winnow ant up closely. If you're at all interested in finding your spirit ant, you can go to this website. I think it's on here somewhere. It's a really fascinating site about ants. And as you can see here, almost 2/3 of all herb seeds produced in the forest are picked up by winnow ants. So they're a really integral part of the ecology of the forest, and we tend not to even give them much of a thought. Here they are moving. You can see how big this seed is compared to them. They're going to move that to their lair, to their nest. Some of the animals that cache seeds, they have a seed cache, are also useful in moving seed around. Not quite so useful because they actually eat some of the seed because it's giving them nutrition. But sometimes rodents are forgetful and they forget where they put their seed. And so once they forget things, the plant has a chance of, or the seed has a chance of germinating. Obviously, these guys would move the seed a lot further than maybe the ants would. So that's one benefit of them. Box turtles are here because they have an intimate relationship with mayapple. They are primarily responsible for moving mayapple seeds around. And actually, sources say that seeds swallowed and digested and pooped out by turtles have a 40% higher chance of germinating than those that just fall on the ground. So box turtles are interested in the mayapple fruit. People do make fruit out of mayapples, but it has to be absolutely perfectly ripe because all parts of this plant are poisonous. So it's something that you probably should avoid, although some people do that. All right. The last part that we're going to talk about is these happy people and how they interact with native plants, native spring wildflowers. This is a topic that I'm particularly, I really enjoy, because I think when I give tours in the garden, if you can connect a plant to people, people really kind of realize how useful plants are, things that they often don't pay attention to. This is a book that I purchased, which is quite heavy. And it's called Native American Ethnobotany, and I use it for many of the plants that I look up. And it's a really fascinating, plants have been used for millennium by people. And so we're going to take a very brief look at that. like I said, many of these plants are geophytes, and a lot of times their underground storage units are edible. This is Spring Beauty, little bulbs. They're actually called fairy spuds, which I think is delightful. They're very small. If you are harvesting, you have to always make sure that it's not in a protected area. You also never harvest too much. You don't really need them to eat, so I would just leave them alone. But I love the idea of fairy buds, and they're very popular with foragers. But make sure that you're in a world in which you observe all the rules. Cutleaf toothwort that we have here, I don't think it particularly grows here naturally, but we have it. And it is part of the mustard family, and people cut it up and add it to vinegar for a horseradish substitute. So those are two of the things that I found. I'm sure there are many, many more. The third one is our wonderful violets, which can be candied, that can be made into Parma violet candy. This is a specific kind of European violet. I'm not sure if Native Americans used violets as candies. That would be something interesting to look at. And for perfume, again, Parma European violet, but possibly, Native Americans, maybe settlers, found violets and used them in these ways. More research, definitely. Dyes. Now, this is bloodroot, sanguinaria. Both ways, the scientific name and the common name tell you something about it. Blood and root, sanguine, blood. These roots, you can see how red they are. They have been used extensively as a dye. Cherokee in this area would have taken the dye and mixed it with with animal fat, and then use it as paint on, and the fat was important because this dye has some really nasty properties, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also used to dye baskets, white oak baskets or river oak baskets. This lovely orange color is from the bloodroot. This is probably from walnut, not 100% sure. But Cherokee baskets, if you go up to Cherokee, North Carolina, there's a wonderful folklore place that you can see a lot of the crafts and explore that relationship between Native Americans and plants. It's very cool. And then this is dye used with bloodroot. This is wool. So medicines. If you're familiar with the doctrine of signs in olden days, probably the 1700s and before, the idea was in the doctrine of signs that if a plant looked like something, it was to treat that something. So the idea that the bloodroot looked like blood, the idea was that they could treat the blood. A walnut looks like a brain, so it could treat the brain. In this case, hepatica, and this bothers me because hepatica is to do with the liverwort. You can see here liverwort, but actually liverwort, it was used to treat really things to do with the lungs and with breathing. But even so, no matter what, hepatica was used so extensively medicinally that it was almost eradicated. It was exported to Europe, and it was a very, very popular treatment for all of these kinds of complaints. I love this little image. I love dogs and cats, what can I say? So this is for Dr. Rogers' syrup, liverwort, tar, and whatever that is, which I don't think I want to ever try. So a medicine. Bloodroot was actually viewed as almost a cure-all. It was used to treat blood things, skin diseases. It's been used in toothpaste. It is banned, I believe now, The problem with bloodroot is that it's a necrotic. And if you get that bloodroot sap on your hand, it looks like it was used a lot for cancers. It kind of looked like it was taking the cancers off, but actually it's destroying the skin. And you get this thing called an eschar, which is not good. So bloodroot has been very popular, but very dangerous, very, very dangerous. All right, so that's sort of my talk. And I wanted to share with you some of the resources that I use all the time that might be useful to you. Like I said, I love the relationship between people and plants. And so I use the Illinois Wildflowers site a lot. Name That Plant, which is a South Carolina website for all the plants in South Carolina, and Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower, then a few other. I'm going to open it to questions because this is going to end in 10 minutes. I am going to thank you all profusely, and I'm going to look at the chats first for any questions. Okay, I have questions. Are the bloodroot blooming at Sassafras now? Okay, so has anyone been to Sassafras? I would guess no, because they're not flowering here. Okay, so any questions from anybody? All right, no questions? Chat.
Where can you get like spring beauty? I've looked around for that, but I live in the Columbia area.
Mm-hmm. You'd have to really have a very shady, cool spot. The South Carolina Native Plant Society has a list of nurseries that are native, and they would be able to direct you. Online, you have to make sure that they're not something that's being, they have to be ethically sourced. If I find something, I'll do some research. I will send you a link.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, any other questions? That was a lot of information. If you reflect on it and in the middle of the night, you think, what was she talking about? I want to know. Please feel free to email me. I do apologize. Yes, Carolina. Yes, I will email you the whole presentation, as it will be a PDF file and it will have everything on it. Carolina Wild is an excellent source for native plants, and they are on that list. Yeah.
I do have a question about the ants. Do red ants do any good?
I'm so glad you asked. No, they don't. So okay. I was going quickly. Red ants, actually, they are attracted to the seed, but they actually chew up the seed instead. So they're actually destroying the seed.
Okay. Well, then, is there a good way to get rid of those without like poisoning your, the other things that are in your yard?
So fire ants typically are in full sun, and the other ants are in the woods. So you should have a natural division there. If you've got fire ants in your yard, I saw a presentation by our fire ant specialist, and she said the best thing to do is to use Amdro according to the package directions, which I had never read, which actually say, I always used to put the Amdro on top of the red ant, the mound. You put it around the mound because it's a bait. And then they'll take that bait into their nest site.
Okay. Thank you.
So they shouldn't really be overlapping, but with temperatures climbing so much, I'm not really sure.
If you use the andro, because we have some that are coming up like in the plants, like in some asters,
Mhm.
will it kill the plants?
No, no, no. It's
Thank you.
specifically targeted to the insects, to the ants.
Great. Thank you.
Anyone else? I really, really, really thank you for your patience, and I will email everything to you. And I will have this recorded as well in all its little pieces and parts. So if you need it, I will have it. And I do thank you for coming. I do appreciate it. And I'm going to do that thing where I have to stop sharing and say goodbye. So thank
Thank
you.
you, Sue.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Linda.
Sue.
Yes,
Bye,
ma'am.
y'all. Bye.